More champagne, Mom? Larry asked, refilling my glass before I could even answer. I gave a hesitant smile, nervously glancing at my son and his fiancée. We were having a small family dinner to celebrate their engagement, but something didn't feel right in my stomach. To your happiness, Laura, I said, raising my glass. Laura clinked her glass against mine with a purr. I took a big sip. There's something we want to talk about tonight, Larry said, sharing a knowing look with Laura. We're planning a big engagement party next month. Only the best for us. I laughed a bit nervously. That sounds wonderful for you both. But aren't those parties expensive? Oh, we're not paying for it, Laura said casually, waving her hand. That's going to be your gift to us. I almost choked on my drink. I'm sorry? As Larry's mother, it's your duty to pay, Laura continued. We expect you to chip in at least $30,000. Consider it an investment in your son's future. They couldn't be serious. $30,000 for a party. I asked, shocked. Do you realize how unreasonable that is? Don't be ridiculous, Mom, Larry cut in. You make good money, and you have all that inheritance from Dad. You've been saving it all. The mention of my husband, who had recently died from cancer, felt like a fresh wound. I pulled back, hurt by their harsh words. That money is my savings for retirement and to cover my expenses. You didn't even discuss this with me first. Laura rolled her eyes dramatically. Still on about being consulted? Get over it already. You're the mother of the groom. This is what's expected. Just pay up and be happy we're even letting you help. You should feel honored we're inviting you, Larry sneered. Just write the check so we can start planning. I sat there stunned, unable to believe their arrogance and lack of care. I tried once more to reason with my son. Honey, be reasonable. You can have a nice party without it costing so much. Maybe we can cut back a little? Larry slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses shake. I knew you'd be stingy, he yelled. Some mother you are, not even supporting your only son. Tears filled my eyes as I faced their scornful looks. I had always pampered Larry, but I never thought he could be so cruel and disrespectful. I stood up quickly, feeling disgusted by the two unpleasant people in my home. I think you should leave now, I said in a low voice. Laura jumped up and grabbed my shoulders with her sharp red nails. Don't even think about shirking your responsibilities, she hissed, her breath heavy with perfume assaulting my nose. Pay up, or you can forget about having a relationship with Larry and seeing any future grandchildren. I pushed her off forcefully. Get out, I yelled. Leave my house this instant. They left without another word, but I caught them smirking triumphantly at each other. My heart sank as I realized the engagement celebration I had hoped for would only bring greed, manipulation, and pain. The next evening, tired from a long day at work, but determined to resolve the conflict, I prepared a simple pasta dinner, hoping for a frank discussion with Larry. I heard the front door slam and braced myself as loud footsteps approached. Something smells good, Larry said as he walked into the kitchen and headed straight for the wine cabinet. My hopes lifted briefly, then faded as Laura followed him in, reeking of strong perfume. So much for a private chat. To what do I owe the pleasure? I asked, trying to sound calm as I drained the pasta. You're going to love what we have planned, Laura said cheerfully, ignoring my tone as she dug through her flashy handbag. We met with the wedding planner today, and everything is set. All we need is one little thing from you. She pulled out a folder stuffed with brochures and invoices. Just sign here for the $70,000 wedding package. I froze, a chill running down my spine. $70,000, I exclaimed. For a one-day event? That's absurd. It's our special day, Larry complained. Don't I deserve the best? I tried to appeal to his better nature. Son, be reasonable. Let's have a small, meaningful ceremony instead of this extravagance. Laura slammed the folder down. You clueless fool. Who said you have a say in this? She screamed. You'll pay every penny to give your only son the wedding of his dreams. Anger surged within me. But before I could respond, we all turned in surprise to see my daughter Linda standing in the doorway, looking determined. I was so caught up in the argument that I didn't even notice her come in. "Stay out of this," Laura snapped at my daughter, Linda, who is a bold, tattooed graphic novelist. "This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," Linda shot back. "You don't talk to my mother like that." She walked over and stood next to me protectively. Normally, I might have been a bit upset by her stepping in. I've always tried to be the strong, independent head of our family. But right then, I was grateful for her support. Larry threw his hands up dramatically. "I ask for one simple wedding, and my whole family turns against me." He pointed at Linda. "This is all your fault. You're filling Mom's head with crazy ideas. She owes me this money and her loyalty." Linda crossed her arms. "Mom owes you nothing but basic respect, which you clearly can't give back," she said. "She raised you all by herself after Dad died, working hard to give you every chance in life. And this is how you thank her? By using her?" Larry had no comeback, just mumbled under his breath. Linda turned to me, holding my hand firmly. "Stay strong, Mom. Set your limits and demand the respect you deserve. I'm here for you." Feeling a surge of relief, my doubts washed away by my daughter's firm support, I stood up taller. "You both have two choices," I said loudly to Larry and Laura. "Treat me and my daughter with basic decency, or leave our lives for good." Laura opened her mouth, probably ready to say something harsh, but then she saw Linda's stern look and thought better of it. She grabbed Larry by the ear and dragged him out. I squeezed Linda's hand, tears of gratitude in my eyes. "How did I get so lucky to have a daughter like you?" She gave a wry smile, "Just being a chip off the old block. Now, let's eat that pasta and plan our next move. These jerks don't know who they're dealing with." The next week was tough, filled with uncertainty. My phone buzzed nonstop with demanding texts and voicemails from Larry, angry when I didn't call back right away. I started ignoring his calls, not having the energy to deal with his rants. When Saturday afternoon arrived, I decided to treat myself to a manicure to cheer myself up. As I relaxed and the technician worked on my nails, my phone buzzed again. Normally, I would ignore it, but this time, I saw it was Larry's number and curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, honey," I answered cautiously. "It's your witch of a mother," came Laura's harsh voice instead, making my blood start to boil. I was about to hang up when I heard Larry in the background. "Is the old bag actually taking your call? She's been dodging mine all week." Then Larry's voice came through clearly. "Mom, what the heck? I've been calling nonstop. Have you thought more about funding the wedding? The coordinator is on my case." I was ready to say no firmly, but Laura cut me off. "Oh, forget it already. She's clearly a lost cause." I heard a slap, like she swatted his arm. "Your mother is a selfish old prune. Once we're married, we'll change all the account passwords so she can't touch our money." My eyes widened. "Our money?" More noise followed. Then Laura sneered. "Why are we even inviting her to the wedding? She'll just show up in some cheap outfit from a discount store." Their loud laughter made my blood boil, but Larry's next words were worse. "Right. And she'll complain about helping us, as if that tiny insurance payout compares to what I make in a month." I was furious. That tiny payout was nearly $500,000 I had saved for retirement, not wasted like my irresponsible son. Laura laughed loudly. "Oh, please, we both know it was your dad's money that got you that job. Your mom couldn't handle money without a man's help." "Absolutely," Larry laughed. "And we're using that inheritance money way better, like our first-class trips to Australia." Their laughter enraged me. I pressed the red button on my phone so hard I almost cracked the screen. Hearing their cruel words confirmed my suspicions and shook me deeply. My hands shook with anger and outrage. I quickly waved off the concerned looks from the nail technician, threw some cash on the counter, and rushed out the door. I drove home as fast as I could, filled with the need to talk to someone about what happened. Thankfully, Linda was already there, her motorcycle parked unevenly on the driveway. I burst through the front door, and Linda jumped up from the couch, surprised by my upset look. I poured out the whole story, feeling enraged. Linda's green eyes flashed with anger. "Those deceivers," she shouted. "I knew it. They never cared about family or celebration. They just see you as a money source." "I feel so betrayed and used," I said, feeling bitter and trying not to cry. "My own son, how could he?" Linda took me by the shoulders, looking me in the eye. "Mom, listen. We need to get proof and expose these lowlifes for who they are." She slapped her hand with her fist, showing she meant business. "Contact the wedding planner. Get all the documents showing plans made without your oak. I'll look into Laura's background too. I bet her family is rich despite her act." I felt hope and courage rise in me again. Linda was right. It was time to take control and fight back. I hugged her tightly, more thankful than ever for her honesty and strength. "Let's expose them," I said. Over the next 4 weeks, Linda and I collected a lot of evidence showing Larry and Laura's dishonesty. Linda found out that Laura came from a very wealthy family. Her dad owns a big real estate investment company and could easily pay for their extravagant wedding. Meanwhile, I got financial records from the wedding planner showing the huge costs Larry and Laura wanted me to cover $95,000 and counting. "We have everything we need to confront these cheaters," Linda announced, spreading the papers on the dining table. "Let's invite them over to talk about wedding plans, and then reveal what we know," she suggested, her eyes shining with determination. I called them, pretending I was ready to discuss paying for the wedding. They took the bait and agreed to come right away. They arrived on time, the doorbell ringing loudly. Larry and Laura walked in, as usual, full of arrogance and the smell of expensive perfume. "Where's my check?" Larry demanded immediately, never one for subtlety. Laura elbowed him, then put on a fake sweet smile. "Yes, do tell us the good news," she said cheerily. "We have so many decisions to finalize for our big day." I gestured for them to sit down. Linda quietly handed me a thick manila envelope full of damning evidence. My heart raced, but I felt determined. I clasped my hands tightly on the table. "Before we discuss any more plans, I have some concerns," I said. I pulled the papers from the envelope and spread them out in front of me. According to the wedding planner, the current expenses total $95,000. "Can you explain this?" I asked. Laura scoffed loudly. "It's the wedding of the century. What do you expect?" "I expect honest communication about money and shared responsibility," I replied calmly. "For example, why don't Laura's very wealthy parents contribute their fair share?" I showed them a copy of her dad's business profile, showing he was worth tens of millions. They could easily afford it. Laura turned pale, and Larry got angry. "Leave Laura's family out of this. It's my wedding, my financial support," he said, pointing at me. "And you're my mother, so just write the check." Expecting their denial, I calmly slid over a pile of invoices and contracts. "Actually, these documents show otherwise. They have my forged signature authorizing $230,000 in non-refundable payments so far. Care to explain that?" Laura gasped. "Are you accusing us of fraud?" From beside me, Linda slammed her fist down. "Damn right she is," she shouted, surprising them into silence. She then spread out the rest of the contents from the envelope: bank statements, screenshots, phone records. Clear evidence of their lies and manipulation lay scattered dramatically across the table. "It's all here, clear as day," Linda said with disgust. "You've been exploiting my mother's love and trust, never caring about family, just what you can get from her." "You were spying on us," Larry said in outrage. "Collecting evidence against your fraud," I corrected calmly. "And now you'll cancel this sham wedding immediately." Laura jumped up furious. "How dare you?" she yelled. "I will marry Larry with or without your money." She turned to my son, expecting support. But Larry just sat there, pale and quiet, overwhelmed by the revelations. Finally, Laura rolled her eyes. "You're spineless mama's boy," she muttered, grabbed her flashy handbag and stormed out. At the doorway, she turned to give one last angry look. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "We won't forget." Then she left in a huff, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air. I looked straight at my shaken son. "Nor will we," I said quietly. "Now leave." He got up quickly, but before he left, he mumbled a soft yet clear threat. "I'll make you pay for this." The day I had dreaded finally arrived: Larry and Laura's lavish wedding. Despite our previous confrontation, they went ahead with their extravagant plans, using even more of the retirement money I had put in Larry's accounts. So there I sat, a reluctant participant in their over-the-top wedding. All around me, guests who had drunk too much wandered under extravagant floral decorations that cost more than my first car. The highlight was an 8-tiered cake decorated with handcrafted sugar flowers. Larry and Laura's smug faces were displayed above everything in a huge golden frame. Next to me, Linda slouched in her ripped jeans and combat boots, her pixie-cut green hair standing out against the pastel bridesmaid dresses. We watched the lavish event unfold, barely hiding our disgust. Then, the music changed to a grand wedding march, and the crowd quieted as Larry took his place under a brightly decorated arch. My heart tightened. He looked so much like his father, handsome in his tuxedo, radiating charm. There was no sign of the greedy boy I had confronted weeks ago. As Laura walked down the aisle in a fancy dress that I suspected was charged to my credit card, old memories and sadness surged within me. Over 28 years ago, I had walked that same path, full of naive dreams of love and family that quickly turned sour. My faith in love had faded with my husband's death, and now the son we had raised showed me the same cold disregard. As the ceremony went on, anger built inside me. I would not stay silent or support this loveless marriage any longer. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly across the polished floor. Everyone looked at me. Linda took my hand, giving me strength. Clearing my throat, I met Larry's shocked look. "I apologize, but I cannot stay silent about this farce," I declared. The guests murmured in shock. Larry's face turned red, and he looked embarrassed under my stern gaze. Before he could say anything, Laura pushed past him, her eyes full of anger. "How dare you ruin my perfect day?" she shouted, coming toward me with her hands raised aggressively. I stepped back, recoiling from Laura's hostile energy. Linda immediately stepped in front of the bride. "Back off," she said firmly, standing protectively in front of me. A surprised murmur spread through the room. No one else moved to help. Larry kept his head down, not looking at me, and didn't try to stop Laura. My heart broke. All illusions were gone. I no longer had a son. The greedy, cowardly stranger in front of me would never again receive my support or resources. I moved past Linda to speak to everyone. "Let all bear witness to this fake, pretentious wedding," I said loudly. I refused to support these deceivers any longer, and I cut all ties. This farce ends now. I turned and walked briskly to the exit, my skirt swirling dramatically. As I passed my shocked son, I paused long enough to echo his earlier threat, "You'll regret this." Then I walked away confidently, Linda right beside me, our footsteps echoing a firm departure from that toxic place. We stepped into the dim sunlight outside, the doors closing behind us, cutting off Laura's angry shouts. I took a deep, freeing breath. Relief washed over me as Linda and I got into her car. "Thank you for being there with me," I told her, patting her tattooed hand. She smiled slightly. "Are you kidding? I've wanted to stand up to Laura for years." As we drove away from the extravagant deceit, tears came to my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief, not sadness or regret. Looking at my brave, loyal daughter smiling back at me, I knew I would never be alone again. In the months after that disastrous wedding, I changed my phone number, moved to a new place, and shifted my remaining assets, cutting off all contact with Larry and his toxic bride. I heard through rumors that they had their honeymoon in Australia, likely using what was left of my retirement savings. Let them indulge, I thought bitterly. Reality will catch up soon. Sure enough, just a year later, Larry showed up at my doorstep. I came home to find him sitting there, unshaven and smelling of stale cigarettes. I was so surprised that I froze, my grocery bag slipping from my hands. Larry's eyes showed a flash of embarrassment. He tried to help me pick up my things, then said quietly, "Hey Ma, can we talk?" I walked past him without a word to unlock my front door, motioning for him to come inside. He lingered awkwardly as I slowly put away the groceries, steeling myself before finally speaking. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. Larry cleared his throat. "I need your help, just temporarily," he quickly added, as if that made his request any less bold. "I'm between jobs right now, and Laura is upset because I can't cover her expenses." "Absolutely not," I said sharply, cutting off his rambling. I crossed my arms, feeling both anger and satisfaction. "You made this mess, now deal with it." Larry looked shocked, not used to such a direct denial. "Come on, Ma, I'm really struggling here. Can't you lend me a few thousand? I'll pay you back, I swear." I stood firm, unmoving. "You never planned to pay me back the first time you emptied my accounts," I reminded him coldly. "Why should I believe you now?" He blushed. "I was wrong before, okay, but I'm still your son." With a swift motion of my hand, I cut him off. "You lost that privilege long ago. I have no son," I declared, pointing at him. "Now you face the consequences. Get out." He tried to speak, but no words came out against my firm disgust. With drooping shoulders, Larry left my house and my life once again. It was about time he experienced the reality of his actions. I locked the door quickly, feeling a rush of vindication before any pity or regret could set in. There was no forgiving someone who repeatedly betrayed me. Larry's pitiful state was proof that karma was catching up with him. I later heard that his fancy tech startup had failed within a year, and my business contacts had shunned him. No investor wanted anything to do with his dubious schemes. Meanwhile, Laura returned to her wealthy father after too many arguments over unpaid bills. The last I heard, she was planning to divorce Larry and was involved with a wealthy older man in San Remo. That night, Linda and I toasted to their misfortunes over cocktails, laughing about the rumors that Larry was now working in fast food under a fake name. "Karma's a harsh one," Linda said, raising her glass. "Here's to it continuing to bite those who deserve it." I happily clanked my glass against Linda's. "No truer words have been spoken," I agreed. Over the next year and a half, Linda's career took off. More and more high-profile clients wanted her unique tattoo designs and graphic novels. She even got a book deal for her bold memoir about our family struggles, which was creating a buzz before it even hit the shelves. Behind the scenes, Linda trusted me with her growing finances. At her request, I used my years of experience to secure trademarks, negotiate publishing rights, and maximize her profits. I was so proud to see her passions thrive with my help. Linda started appearing in trendy fashion magazines and was featured in popular graphic anthologies. She bought a stylish loft downtown, which served as her business hub and showcased the impressive views she had earned with her talent. To celebrate Linda's success, I planned a small party at her chic new place. It would mark her as a true artistic force and independent businesswoman. Linda welcomed the guests with a bit of nervousness, so I reassured her as I adjusted her blazer. "Just be yourself. Everyone here already loves you." Soon, the loft was filled with Linda's creative friends, including daring writers, top publishers, edgy photographers, and even some famous faces from her celebrity clients, all there to celebrate their favorite artist. My heart swelled with pride hearing such influential people praise my daughter. This was the kind of launch party Larry could only dream of. 3 years ago, Our family name was damaged by selfish actions, but now, thanks to Linda's hard work, we had gained respect and admiration at the highest levels of the art world. Late in the evening, I joined Linda on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. She squeezed my hand. "None of this would have been possible without you, Mom. You believed in me when no one else did, and fought for me. I'll always owe you." I hugged her, holding my champagne flute. "Nonsense, my brave girl. Your success is all because of your talent and vision. I just handled the business side so you could focus on creating." Linda smiled. "Well, I definitely got your business sense and Dad's creative flair," she joked, clinking her glass with mine. "Here's to us, beating the odds and staying strong together." I laughed happily, feeling a deep joy as a mother. My daughter and I had survived tough times of greed and betrayal, and now we were thriving on our own success. As the party went on, I quietly raised my glass to the sky, thinking of her late father. We had indeed created a wonderful legacy, one built on integrity, courage, and hard work, not entitlement or manipulation. This legacy stood as a shining example to others, making the likes of Larry envious for years to come. Over the next 3 years, Linda's career continued to rise brilliantly. Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that Larry was struggling with obscurity and growing debt. His extravagant lifestyle hung on until his credit ran out and everything fell apart. Occasionally, I'd hear about Larry in the gossip columns, from Laura's very public affair to him getting fired from a car dealership for missing payments. I took these stories with quiet satisfaction, confident that our paths would never cross again. I had retired from my corporate role to focus on my passions, pursuing artistic hobbies, helping disadvantaged youth, and planning trips around the world. I also decided to move to a more manageable home and found the perfect place in a scenic coastal senior community. Surrounded by mature trees and vibrant gardens, I enjoyed peaceful walks with close friends, finding a new sense of tranquility. Meanwhile, Linda found her match in Riley, a brilliant software developer who loved her spirited nature. I saw true partnership potential in him right away, and my feelings were confirmed when they moved in together. Soon after, Linda excitedly showed me the unique ring Riley had designed, announcing their engagement. "My darling girl," I said, my eyes tearing up with joy, "I'm thrilled you found someone who deserves your big heart." Linda described her dream of a small garden wedding, much like my own vision from decades ago. No extravagant displays, just a deep, lifelong commitment surrounded by loved ones. I held her hand, emotionally moved by how beautifully she was realizing the dreams her father and I once had. Later, as we planned the wedding over tea and biscuits, Linda hesitated, then mentioned a difficult topic. "Mom, about inviting Larry." I quickly waved off the idea. "Let's not ruin your special day by bringing him into it," I said firmly. Linda looked conflicted. "I just can't help but feel sorry for him, you know. He's clearly a mess, but he's still family even if he doesn't deserve it." "I wonder if including him would be the right thing," Linda said, trailing off, unsure. Seeing my daughter's compassion, even for someone who hadn't shown her the same, I patted her hand reassuringly. "You shouldn't have to compromise your kindness. If it eases your mind to show Larry some small mercy, I can handle his presence just this once." Linda exhaled in relief and squeezed my hand, thankful. "You're the best, Mom. I knew you'd understand." Our sentimental moment was suddenly interrupted by my ringing cell phone. I was surprised to see Larry's name flash across the screen. It had been months since his last call, a desperate plea for money. With a grim face, I silenced the call. "Speak of the devil," I remarked. Linda shook her head. "He never stops trying to come back in. But don't worry, Mom. After the wedding, you'll never have to deal with his mess again." I smiled at Linda's protective words. She was right. It was time to stop listening to Larry's self-pitying attempts. I now had everything I needed right here, in a peaceful life surrounded by people who nurtured my spirit. No remnants from a toxic past could change that. I patted Linda's hand firmly. Onwards and upwards, my dear. Now, tell me more about those lovely flower arrangements you've been thinking about. I looked at my dad's bank account and saw nearly $600 million in it. I thought to myself, this money is all mine now. I don't need you anymore. After my kind father-in-law passed away, I was still grieving when my husband came to me and casually dropped the news that he wanted a divorce. It turns out he was only showing his true colors after getting his hands on the $600 million inheritance from his father. He saw me as nothing more than an ATM, just waiting for Dad to pass away so he could live a lavish life without having to work. I had seen glimpses of his true nature before, but I never realized he was this awful. Before I knew it, I was clenching my fists, angry at myself for being fooled into this marriage. I could accept being deceived, but I couldn't stand him speaking badly about my kind father-in-law. Fine, I said, hand me those divorce papers. I snatched the papers from my husband, signed them quickly, and threw them back at him. All right, the rest is up to you, I told him. Yeah, leave it to me, he replied, smugly. He offered to send my belongings, and I walked past him, out of the living room, and left the house. I knew my husband would regret divorcing me. Sure enough, he called me later, panicking when I explained that the $600 million was just a fantasy. My name is Mary, I'm 45 years old, and I work in sales. My husband John is also 45, and he used to work in sales, but now stays at home. There's a story behind him becoming a homemaker, but to explain that, I should start with my first husband. This is my second marriage. My first husband died in a work accident 5 years ago, leaving me a widow. Between life insurance and severance pay, I received about $600,000. Since my first marriage happened later in my 33s, we didn't have any children. I inherited the money along with my ex-in-laws, but they told me, we're almost 82 years old and don't have much time left, so we don't need it. I couldn't accept that and decided to give the money to my ex-brother-in-law and his wife, who were living with my ex-in-laws. However, they also said, we don't need much since it was my brother's money. You should use it, so they only took a small portion of the money. In the end, after paying a significant amount in inheritance taxes, most of the money ended up with me. Combined with our savings and the fact that I had a job, I became fairly well off by the age of 41. But even with all that, sitting alone at home and looking at the numbers in my bank account, I felt empty. When I came home from work, no one was there, and no one ever would be. The bed beside me stayed perfectly made, just as it was before I went to sleep. The worst part was when I accidentally made breakfast for two. As I took a bite of the second piece of toast, I thought, this must be what it feels like to have a hole in your heart. I really wanted to take some time off, but I had to keep working, so I went back to my job with this emptiness inside me, constantly feeling a sense of void. I desperately wanted someone, anyone, to listen to me, and that someone turned out to be my current husband. When I told him about my husband passing away and how I had to take some time off because of it, he said, I'm sorry for any inconvenience. I quickly replied, No, it was no inconvenience at all. Besides, your husband was a lucky man to have someone who cared for him so much. I'm sure he was very happy. He then shared a bit about himself, saying, as for me, I'm terrible at relationships. Even when I do date someone, I get dumped quickly. I know it's because of my careless personality, but it seems hard to change who you are. My husband and I were business acquaintances before we got to know each other better. I knew he was a cheerful person, so when I visited his company, I ended up telling him everything. Normally, anyone would find such a dark and heavy story off-putting, but he listened quietly and then cheered me up with some light-hearted jokes. His words and smile seemed to fill a bit of the hole in my heart. He continued to listen to my stories, and we started meeting outside of work. One day, while we were talking, I accidentally dropped a receipt, and he jokingly said, Wow, My wallet is twice as thick with coins. You dropped a receipt, and we both laughed. I need to organize it, but it's such a hassle. When he tried to pay at a store, receipts started falling out as he pulled out some cash. I picked up the receipts and handed them back to him, and he stuffed them back into his wallet, complaining about the coins. It seemed like the receipts were also making his wallet bulky. "You're like a kid, John," I teased. "What? I'm 45, you know," he replied. Just as he said, he was a bit careless, but watching him, I felt the hole in my heart slowly start to close. We kept meeting privately, and a year later, he told me he had feelings for me. It had only been a year since my previous husband passed away, so I was torn, but I felt like my late husband was telling me, "Don't stay stuck, move forward." So I decided to start dating John. People around us had their opinions, but making that important decision helped me begin to heal. However, just a month later, John gave me an even bigger concern and asked me to make an incredibly important decision. Shouldn't we get married? Given our age, it's better to decide sooner rather than later. This time, I couldn't hear my late husband's voice guiding me. It felt like he was telling me to trust my own intuition and keep moving forward, so I decided to marry John. "Okay, let's get married," I said, surprising even myself with how quickly I made that decision. It was likely John's personality rubbing off on me. I started to think that a bit of carelessness wasn't so bad if it made me more positive. At the same time, I learned from John that too much carelessness could be problematic. "Wait, live with your dad?" I asked. "Yeah, just recently, he got sick and needs help with daily living. He kept working past 73, thinking he was still young, and now this happened." "What about your mom? Is she helping him?" "Huh, didn't I mention it? My mom's not around. My parents divorced when I was young, and I haven't seen her since. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Sorry, don't be mad, but it's a heavy topic to bring up when we weren't sure about getting married yet, right? I figured I'd tell you later. Even if you put off talking about living together, you could have told me about your parents. I would have known that living together might be an option." "Well, let's not sweat the small stuff. Just meet my dad and then decide if you're okay with living together. And if I say I can't live with him, we'll figure it out then," John said with a smile, but I couldn't smile back. "I'm not planning to say I don't want to marry you just because I don't want to live together. I just wish he had told me the important things earlier. I thought being careless wasn't so bad, but now I see it's not a good thing after all." In the end, I agreed to meet his father, as John suggested. Then I began to understand what he meant by small stuff. "Your house is pretty big," I said. "Just a bit. It's just me and Dad, so we have some extra rooms. If you move in, you can use any of the spare rooms," John replied. I was about to meet his dad for the first time, so I was a little nervous. Ignoring my feelings, John opened the gate and walked towards the front door. His house was 3 stories high, slightly bigger than the neighboring houses. Living there with just the 2 of them seemed quite luxurious. That's what I thought, but John seemed dissatisfied. "Dad's so stingy. He should have built a bigger house," he muttered to himself. But I was too nervous about meeting his dad to confirm what he said. "Dad, I brought her. This is Mary," John said. "Nice to meet you," I said. "Sorry to greet you from bed. It's been hard to move lately," his dad replied. "Please don't strain yourself," I said. John's father propped himself up with John's help. He wasn't bedridden, and it seemed he could get up and walk slowly with a bit of help, so he could manage with some assistance. Despite his physical issues, his father seemed sharper than I expected. "So, Mary, you're in sales for office equipment. With the move to paperless offices, selling the hardware must be getting tougher, right?" his dad asked. "Yes, industry-wide, equipment sales have been declining for about 11 years, so everyone is focusing on new services or business expansion," I replied. Considering that the domestic market for the equipment is almost saturated, you need to look at countries where there's still demand for new services. IT integration might be the way to go. I think there's something called MPS, right? He said. I completely forgot I was talking to my future father-in-law. The conversation flowed so naturally into work talk that I switched to work mode. His father didn't push too hard on the marriage topic either. He was probably being considerate of my feelings. After just a few minutes of talking, I found myself respecting him. I started to understand why John called living together small stuff. He probably knew I wouldn't oppose living with his dad. About 30 minutes into our conversation, his father said, "My back's starting to hurt. Sorry to cut this short, Mary, but I need to rest. Please take care of John. He's quite a chatterbox." "Sure, I will," I replied. Is sure the right response. His father seemed to cut the conversation short to avoid burdening me. I wanted to talk more, but I didn't want to tire him out. Feeling a bit disappointed, I left with John. On the way back, John told me more about his dad. "Dad's a serial entrepreneur," John said. "A serial what?" I asked. "A serial entrepreneur. He starts companies, grows them, then sells them. He's done it multiple times," John explained. "You can just buy and sell companies like that." I was surprised. Well, yeah. Selling one company involves millions of dollars. Starting and growing a company also needs a lot of money, so the sale isn't all profit. But still, Dad's pretty well off. He just doesn't like to spend. He could build a mansion that would make jaws drop, but he doesn't, John said. "Don't you know much about his work?" I asked. "He doesn't talk much about work or money. He never hired me for his companies or taught me how to make money. Living at home is the only way he spoils me. If he's got so much money, he could spoil me a little more, don't you think?" John replied. "Your dad probably has his reasons," I said. It seemed his father was quite an impressive person. It made sense that John might feel overshadowed by him. Given how incredible his father is, John probably got compared to him a lot, so it's understandable that he'd have some complaints. "By the way, why did your mom leave? Your dad seems so kind. It's hard to imagine their marriage not working out," I asked. "Mom spent a lot and wanted an easy life. After the divorce, people only came after Dad's money, so he decided never to marry again. He focused on work instead. With that much money, he could have spent a bit, don't you think?" John answered. "I don't believe in spending money just because you have it," I said. From what John told me, it seemed his mom relied on his father's money, so I couldn't agree with John on this point. But I think his words came from feeling inadequate compared to his father. Later, I talked with John about living with his father. His father currently relies on John for help and also gets assistance from a home helper when John is at work. I thought my husband and I would continue working while getting help from a home assistant to take care of my father-in-law. However, John surprised me with a different idea. "I want to quit my job and take care of Dad," John said. "What? Quit your job?" I was shocked. "Dad's such an incredible person, right? I feel like I haven't done anything for him all this time, so from now on, I want to support him without relying on a caregiver." "I'll be like a homemaker," John explained. "I'll take care of the house too," John said. "Are you sure you won't regret quitting your job?" I asked. "I'd regret not doing anything for Dad more. I can go back to work after he's gone," he replied with a small smile. "That joke isn't funny," I said, feeling worried. I thought my husband might resent his father, but it turned out that wasn't the case. Despite everything, he really cared for his dad. "If you're going to be a homemaker, you better handle the housework properly," I warned. "Leave it to me," John said, puffing out his chest confidently. Since my father-in-law would cover his own expenses and my income would be enough for the two of us, I decided to leave the housework to my husband. When we got married and started living together, everything went as planned. I worked and John took care of the house. He managed the chores, handled the finances, and supported his dad. When I tried to help, he would say, "You're tired from work. I'll handle the house stuff. You rest." My father-in-law remained kind and shared many valuable stories with me. Our second marriage was going well. However, I noticed that my father-in-law would sometimes frown when he saw John doing housework. A month after we started living together, John began slacking off with the house chores. "You're sleeping on the couch again. You've been there all day, haven't you?" I asked. "No way. I went to the fridge when I was thirsty and to the bathroom too," John said, trying to defend himself. "That's not what I mean. What about dinner? Did you go grocery shopping?" I asked. "Dinner's ready. Don't worry," he replied. I glanced at the kitchen, but there was no sign of any cooking. All I saw was an empty container on the dining table. It was clear he had been lazy all day. From this, I realized what John meant by "dinner's ready." Perfect timing, the intercom rang, and John grabbed his wallet and headed to the door. I was too stunned to say anything. John had only handled the housework diligently for the first 3 weeks. After that, he gradually stopped doing anything, and I ended up cooking, cleaning, and doing the laundry. It's typical for someone with a careless personality to start strong and then quickly slack off. Caught up in the excitement of getting married, I hadn't foreseen this. My father-in-law, on the other hand, must have predicted it early on, which is why he frowned when he saw John doing housework. As my husband began to shirk his duties, my father-in-law started apologizing to me, saying, "That boy is so careless. I'm really sorry, Mary. I hoped he'd become more responsible after getting married, but it seems he's just causing you trouble. If he becomes a burden, feel free to kick him out." I wouldn't do that. Really, it's okay. I'm sorry. I've tried to correct him, but he's just, well, you know. It's okay, but he isn't neglecting to help you, right? I asked. "No, he does help me, at least a little," I replied, noticing a slight change in my father-in-law's expression. It was clear that John wasn't completely ignoring his father, but he also wasn't doing a third job. Still, my father-in-law was probably downplaying the situation to avoid any conflicts between us. "I'm sorry," I said. "No, Mary, you don't need to apologize," my father-in-law replied. With just one word, sorry, he seemed to understand what I was feeling. We both apologized, and there was a bit of awkwardness between us. To break the tension, my father-in-law quickly changed the subject with a brighter tone. "Oh, I'm doing some end-of-life planning and need your help. I'm not confident in John handling it." End-of-life planning? It's not as negative as it sounds. I just want to avoid any trouble later. Got it. If there's anything I can do, I'd be happy to help. Talking about John made us both cautious, so we ended up avoiding discussions about him and housework. It was an uncomfortable way of being considerate, but there were also thoughtful gestures that made me happy. "Is there anything inconvenient at home?" my father-in-law asked. "Not really, but the bathroom could use some fixing. I had just wanted the water heater checked," I said, but my casual comment turned into something much bigger. "Wait, what's this?" I exclaimed when I saw the changes. My father-in-law had contacted a contractor he knew, and they completely renovated the bathroom. Not only were the tub and shower replaced, but the walls and floors were redone with special coatings to resist grime, and the drain was redesigned to make cleaning easier. They even installed a bath lift to help my father-in-law get in and out easily. "Now I can enjoy a nice clean bath, and it's easier for me to get in and out," he said. It was an extravagant use of money, and this happened a few times where a small request turned into a huge upgrade. I learned not to ask my father-in-law for small favors lightly, yet my husband still called him stingy. I couldn't understand how John could see it that way, given how generously his father spent money. Out of curiosity, I asked my father-in-law about his most extravagant spending. "What's the most luxurious thing you've ever done?" I asked. "I started a seafood company in Germany, built the office and the factory from scratch. That cost a fortune." "A company in Germany? That's impressive, but it was work, right?" "Well, yes and no. I did it because I wanted to, so it was more like a hobby. Why seafood in Germany? Was it because it was profitable? No, I had no knowledge or connections and didn't think about profits. Germany exports a lot of seafood, and we import a lot of it. I love seafood, so I thought I could make money and eat all the food I wanted, he said, looking happier than I'd ever seen him. He must have really enjoyed that time, but if he just wanted seafood, he could have bought as much as he wanted. Starting a company overseas seemed extravagant. Do all successful people think this way? It's a world far beyond the understanding of an ordinary person like me. It made me realize that my father-in-law wasn't stingy. He was just careful about when and where to spend money. My husband just didn't understand that. One day, my husband burst into David's room and vented his frustration at both of us. You listened to Mary's requests, but not mine. Are you talking about the bathroom? You use it too, right? And since cleaning is easier now, it's a big help to you as a homemaker, right? Mary gets to enjoy a nice bathroom, and it's convenient for me too. No one loses here, David replied calmly. My husband clicked his tongue loudly and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I'm really sorry, I said. It's fine, but why don't you listen to your son's requests? I asked. He's like his mother. When he has money, he spends it without thinking. Even with a lot of money, you need to understand its value and how to use it wisely. I've tried teaching him that many times, but he's still the same, David said, his expression turning somber. Since that day, my husband had become even more neglectful. Not only did he stop doing anything around the house, but he started causing unnecessary trouble. Whose motorcycle is that outside? Did you buy it? No one else's motorcycle would be here. I yelled at my husband as soon as I got home from work, but he just polished an expensive-looking golf club in the living room without even looking at me. My husband had stopped doing housework and started buying whatever he wanted. I wouldn't complain if he was spending his own money, but he was using my bank account without permission. You get your requests granted by Dad. Let me have a bit of luxury too, he said, trying to justify his actions. He had been diligent as a homemaker at first, and I hadn't seen this lazy side of him before we got married. It seemed he had been hiding his true self before marriage. I was completely fooled. When we got married, I told my husband, if my salary isn't enough for our living expenses, feel free to use the money in my account. I took back my bank book so he couldn't use the money without my permission. When I checked it, I saw he had spent around $50,000 in just 3 weeks. It was an expensive lesson that I couldn't trust him. Naturally, I thought about divorcing him, but I didn't want to leave my father-in-law in his care, so I erased divorce from my list of options. My husband seemed to sense that I wouldn't divorce him and became even more arrogant. Hey, can't you come home earlier? I've been waiting for dinner all this time, he complained, treating the living room sofa like his personal nest and hardly moving from there. Of course, he did no housework at all. What does being a homemaker mean? I was starting to lose my understanding of it. He had said he didn't want to rely on a home assistant and wanted to be a good son, but he ended up hiring a caregiver again. Honestly, this made me feel better knowing my father-in-law wasn't left to my lazy husband. I decided to avoid my husband as much as possible, thinking, let sleeping dogs lie. With this mindset, the year flew by quickly. Then a significant event happened for both me and my husband. Thank you for everything. My father-in-law passed away just before turning 81. The time I spent with him was short but incredibly meaningful to me. It felt like we had spent 11 years together. Even after the funeral, I couldn't pull myself together and felt a deep void in my heart. As I sat in the living room, lost in emptiness, my husband walked in with a cheerful expression. Hey, let's get divorced. What? That single word snapped me out of my daze. He was waving the divorce papers in my face. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a joke. I found Dad's bank account. Guess how much is in it? Nearly $600 million, so this money is all mine. You're no longer needed. ATM. When Dad collapsed a year ago, I didn't want to deal with taking care of him, so I looked for a wife. I figured you'd be an easy catch since you were grieving the loss of your previous husband. I see, so that's why you were in such a hurry to get married. That's part of it, but then I changed my strategy. You inherited money from your late husband, right? You never talked about it, but I figured his retirement and insurance would be substantial. I took care of Dad while you acted as the ATM until he passed away. It was easier than working. Now that Dad's gone, I'm set for a lavish life with his inheritance. Do you think you can get away with this? I asked, feeling the anger rising. Of course, I'm his son, so it's only natural I inherit his wealth. He worked until he collapsed, and I thought he'd live until 87, but he died sooner than expected, so I'm lucky, he replied smugly. I realized I was clenching my fists. It was my fault for being tricked into marrying him, and I could accept that. But I couldn't forgive him for speaking so badly about my kind father-in-law. I was ready to punch him, not caring about the trouble it might cause later. But then I felt like I heard my father-in-law's voice saying, "Stay calm." Right? There was no need to do anything rash. Are you sure about this? All right, give me the divorce papers, I said. I snatched the papers from my husband, signed them on the spot, and handed them back. Thanks for making this easy. I'll file these tomorrow. You can take all our savings. I've got $600 million, so take as much of that petty cash as you want, he said, clearly gloating. Okay then. Yeah, leave it to me. I'll file the papers and send you your stuff if you want, I replied, walking past him and out of the house. As I left, my anger started to fade, and I felt a wave of laughter rising. My husband would soon regret divorcing me. That $600 million was just a pipe dream. A few days later, while staying at a hotel and looking for a new place to live, my ex-husband called. Hey, what the hell did you do? He yelled. I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear as he started shouting. He seemed confused, so I needed to explain what was happening. I can guess what happened, but why don't you tell me? I asked calmly. When I tried to withdraw money from Dad's account, they said this money can't be withdrawn. What's going on? There should be $600 million in there, he said, his voice full of frustration. Looks like you didn't know. Since your dad didn't spoil you, you never took an interest in his affairs, right? And he never discussed his work with you, I explained. Stop with the riddles. There's money, right? He demanded. Yes, there's $600 million, but it's collateral, so you can't touch it, I replied. Collateral? He asked, his voice shaking. That's right. The money is in the account, but it's untouchable, like a pie in the sky. Also, that money is about to be used to pay off debts, so it'll be gone soon, I explained. You're kidding. There's $600 million, and I can't use any of it. His voice grew quieter as he started to panic. I knew about the $600 million being collateral because I knew about the $600 million being used as collateral because I helped with my father-in-law's end-of-life planning. He had asked me to handle things if anything happened to them. Since he passed away, I was going to use the $600 million to settle his debts. But since my ex suddenly demanded a divorce, I left the paperwork to him, telling him to take care of the rest. What did Dad do with the $600 million? My ex asked. He used it for something he loved, I replied. What does that mean? He asked, confused. At over 72, Dad decided his next job would be his last and used his savings for something he enjoyed, that seafood processing and distribution company in Germany he always talked about. He trusted the management to locals and planned to enjoy his retirement here, but it was a huge failure, and he lost almost everything. When he told me about it, he laughed, saying it was only natural since he did it without any real knowledge. He had no regrets about where he spent his money. To start that company, he borrowed $600 million, using his savings as collateral. but it turned into debt, so he planned to repay it with another job. That seemed impossible, but he didn't think so. Even with the debt, he kept enough money for his retirement. In today's world, where many struggle in retirement, it's impressive. However, while sorting out the Germany company, his health declined. When that happened, he renegotiated his repayment plan with the bank. Given his long history of high-value transactions, they trusted him. He told them, "If I can't work anymore, take the collateral." They agreed to a 2-year grace period, after which the debt would be paid off with the collateral if he couldn't work. That year is up, and it's time to settle the debt. So this $600 million is debt repayment money, and will soon be zero. My ex asked, his voice filled with shock. Exactly. Didn't you find another bank account? There should be one for living expenses. Yeah, I found one with $80,000 in it. That's money you can use freely. It's your inheritance. $600 million turned into $80,000. Why didn't he prepare more for his retirement? My ex wondered, clearly surprised. I was surprised by the $80,000 too, but knowing him, he probably planned to add more if needed. He seemed capable of anything. And it looks like you haven't checked the will yet. Will? Dad told me he'd leave me about 20%, my ex said. We're divorcing, so you could contest it as infringing on your rightful inheritance, but I'd like to honor his wishes. I hope you'll agree to the 20%, I said, noticing he was breathing heavily. He thought he'd get $600 million, but the amount kept shrinking, and now he was panicking. Why did he waste so much money? He could have bought anything with $600 million, my ex yelled, frustrated. Yelling at me won't change anything. He was happiest when he talked about that time, so he had no regrets. It was his money, and he used it. He planned to repay the debt himself, so no one can complain. You just jumped to conclusions and got ahead of yourself, I replied. Why are you so panicked? I asked. The truth is, I thought I'd get $600 million, so I spent all my own money. My account is empty, he admitted. What? Seriously? I was shocked. My ex-husband had been spending money he didn't even have yet. Now that we were divorced, he couldn't rely on my savings anymore, and he was currently unemployed. I finally understood why he was so panicked. Still, you have a roof over your head and a house, so you can rebuild your life, right? I suggested. I'm almost 54, unemployed, and have only a little savings. What's going to happen to me? Please help me, he pleaded. Me? You have savings and a job, don't you? Why should I help an ex-husband? You're suffering the consequences of your own actions, I said firmly. Please, let's pretend the divorce never happened, he begged, but I ignored his pleas and hung up the phone. Having a careless personality is definitely not a good thing. With that thought, I went back to looking at property listings. Surprisingly, my ex-husband did follow through with the will and gave me $40,000 from my father-in-law's inheritance. That made up for the money he had taken from me. He probably thought it was too much trouble to fuss over $40,000 after dealing with the $600 million situation. He also apparently started working in sales again, but he didn't seem to be taking it seriously. The shock of not getting the $600 million affected his motivation, leading to frequent mistakes. After a month of struggling under the scolding of younger supervisors, he saw his paycheck and lost motivation, comparing it to the $600 million he missed out on. He quit after just a month and is now a part-time worker, barely making enough to get by. But with that, his savings of $600,000 won't increase. In fact, it'll probably decrease. I wonder if he's thinking about his retirement? Well, whatever trouble he gets into now is not my concern. There's no ATM for him anymore. He'll have to work hard. I rented a small condo and started living on my own. I put the $40,000 from my father-in-law into my bank account. I consider it a kind of talisman, so I don't plan on spending it. Seeing it in the account feels like I'm carrying a bit of my father-in-law's work spirit with me, which motivates me. Today, I'll draw strength from him and do my best at work. I'm Mary, and I've been a doctor for almost as long as I've been Adam's wife. We've had our share of good times and tough moments, but those 32 years together passed by so quickly. Our home, big and warm, was always full of life, especially when our sons, Larry and Brian, were young. Larry and Brian were very different from each other, like night and day, but each brought their own kind of happiness into our lives. Adam and I, both being doctors, worked really hard to create a comfortable life for our family. Over the years, we managed to buy a couple of apartments, renting them out for some extra money. Life seemed to be going well until one day, Adam came home looking pale and more serious than I had seen him in years. "Mary, we need to talk," he said with a heavy tone as he put down his medical bag by the door. "I had some tests done last week. The results, they came back. It's cancer, Mary." The months that followed were a whirlwind of hospital visits, treatments, and endless hours spent in waiting rooms. Adam fought bravely, but the cancer was relentless. Watching the strongest man I knew weaken and fade away was heartbreaking. No amount of medical knowledge could prepare me for that kind of pain. One evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, Adam took my hand and said, "Mary, if things don't go the way we hope, you need to make sure everything is taken care of with the boys. The will is all set, and you'll be fine financially." Not long after that conversation, he was gone. The funeral was a solemn event, with family, friends, and colleagues coming from all over to pay their respects. But it was the quiet in the house after everyone left that hit me the hardest. The empty spaces where Adam used to be, his belongings still in their usual places, it was painful to see and remember. A few days after the funeral, I was in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to do with all the leftover food, when Larry stormed in, his face full of worry and anger. Brian followed behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else but here. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," Larry said, getting straight to the point, as he always did. I sighed and put down the cling film I was holding. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure." I was trying to manage things when Larry slammed his hand on the counter and said, "But what about me and Brian? We're his sons. It's not fair that we get nothing." Brian stepped in, trying to calm things down. "Larry, let's not rush into this. Mom's still grieving, and we can sort this out without fighting." Larry shot him a look and said, "It's easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future like I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Your father and I built this life together, and he trusted me to take care of things. But I understand what you're saying, Larry. It's not my intention to leave you out." "So what then?" Larry asked, crossing his arms and raising his voice. "Do we just wait until you decide it's the right time to give us our share?" "Larry, watch your tone," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "I am still your mother." Brian stepped between us, holding up his hands like a referee. "Both of you, please. This isn't helping." "Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here." I nodded and rubbed my temples, thinking it over. "Okay, here's what we can do. The apartments your father and I invested in, the ones downtown," I started, but Larry interrupted. "Yes, those." I gave him a look that told him to be quiet for a moment. "I was thinking you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out, and from the savings, let's say $320,000 each to help you get started with whatever you need." Larry bit his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff? The house, the money?" he asked. "That stays with me for now," I replied. "When I'm gone, it will come to you, as your father wanted." Larry looked like he wanted to argue more, but Brian nudged him and said, "Let's think about this. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us with nothing." Larry finally nodded, though he still seemed unhappy. "Fine, but I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises." Of course, I agreed. "We'll get everything documented properly." As they left the kitchen, I could hear Brian whispering to Larry, "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." Larry muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch, and honestly, I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Adam could see us and what he would think. I hoped I was making the right choice, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, isn't always on your side. It was a sunny afternoon, one of those rare days that makes everything feel okay, when Larry brought Julie over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but Larry was already head over heels for her. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right away, Julie had this confident air about her, like she owned the place. She was dressed up and strolled into my living room, with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything around. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting to be invited. Larry was sitting beside her, grinning like a fool. I forced a smile, trying to be a good host. "Thank you, Julie. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to Larry. "Babe, make sure it's black, no sugar." Larry nodded and headed to the kitchen, leaving me alone with her in my own living room, feeling like I was the guest. The silence was awkward until she finally spoke. "So Larry tells me you're pretty well off," she said, looking around at the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not really sure what else to say. Larry came back with the coffee and handed Julie her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been talking about our future together, planning ahead, you know." "That's wise," I said, glancing at Larry, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was going. Julie set her cup down and said, "Yeah, and speaking of planning, we've been thinking about the wedding. You know, I want something special. Larry has probably told you I saw this place that's perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $50,000. I almost choked on my coffee. $50,000 just for the rehearsal dinner. Larry jumped in. "Mom, it's important to Lauren. We want to start things off right." I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. "Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Julie. We need to be reasonable." Julie's face hardened. "Reasonable? Larry says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important." Larry was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. "I'm all for celebrating," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "but $50,000 is more than I can justify." Julie stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Mary." I made it clear to Larry that I expected a certain standard of living. Larry tried to calm things down. "Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground." "There's no middle ground on $50,000 for a dinner, Larry. That's final," I snapped, my patience running out. Julie picked up her purse and glared at me. "Fine, if that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to rethink some things." They left soon after, and I sat there, stunned by what had just happened. The nerve of that girl, coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money, it felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't prepared for. A few days later, I was out at the grocery store when Larry and Julie decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Brian was awkwardly trying to entertain them in the living room. The tension in the air was so thick that it made me want to turn around and leave, but it was my house, so I gathered my courage and walked in. Julie, all dressed up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I put down my grocery bags. "Mary, we've thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've decided on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle." I quickly looked over the list she handed me. It was surprisingly reasonable kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. "This seems quite reasonable," I said, feeling a moment of relief. "I think these are wonderful choices, really." Larry looked at Julie with hope in his eyes, but just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Julie's expression changed suddenly. She gasped. "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and dug through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. "Here's the actual list." This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. Is this some kind of joke? Julie didn't flinch. "No joke, Mary. These are the gifts we expect, only the best for our wedding." I stared at her, then at Larry, waiting for him to say something, anything, to show he didn't agree with this craziness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted but saying nothing. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Larry, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable." Julie cut in, her voice rising. "This doesn't concern you, Mary. You just need to pay up and keep quiet." When Brian stood up, his face was serious. "That's enough, Julie. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now." The room was filled with tension as Larry and Julie gathered their things. Julie was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. "This is ridiculous. We'll remember this." They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. I sat down, feeling the weight of the whole situation pressing on me. Brian sat beside me and put an arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure this out, Mom, but you can't let them push you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right." He was right, of course, but as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about Larry. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unspoken worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get harder from here. In the weeks that followed, I received constant phone calls from Larry. Each one was more demanding than the last, his tone desperate and sometimes almost frantic. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Lauren's family," he'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Larry, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Lauren's expectations are too high, and you can't keep up with them without going into serious debt." He'd scoff, his frustration boiling over. "What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like a pauper. I need more from the inheritance now. The amount you've offered isn't enough." "Larry, I've offered to cover half the wedding costs, up to $135,000, and give a $8,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though, no surprises." There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. "That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me?" "Because it's not just about the money," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "It's about not feeding into this unrealistic fantasy that's going to ruin you." He yelled, loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you." And with that, the call ended. Months passed in silence. I tried to keep myself busy with daily routines, trying not to worry about Larry, but the peace was short-lived. One afternoon, the phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law, Hannah. "Mary, I thought you should know." Hannah's voice was hesitant, careful. "Larry is flying all the wedding guests to Bermuda. He sold his apartment to pay for it and expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping." I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow swirling inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Brian came into the room, his expression serious. "Mom, there's something you need to hear." I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. He handed me an audio recorder. I pressed play, and the voices of Larry and Julie filled the kitchen. "Your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her and then cut her off," Julie's voice said coldly. Larry's voice responded, just as chilling. "Whatever it takes, Lauren. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear." I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. Hearing my own son speak like that about me, his mother, was too much. The room spun as I tried to understand the depth of his betrayal. Deciding to fly to Bermuda wasn't easy, but Brian was by my side, both of us tense but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer extravagance of it all. Flowers everywhere, lights strung like stars across the evening sky, and music floating in the air. As we walked into the gathering, I spotted Larry and Julie mingling with the guests. They looked like the perfect couple, all smiles and laughter. My heart ached to see my son so lost in this artificial paradise. Before I could take another step towards them, Julie spotted us. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl as she marched over, her high heels clicking angrily against the stone pathway. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, stopping just inches from me, her voice loud enough to draw attention. "This is my day, and you're not welcome." I was stunned, but before I could respond, her parents, who had overheard everything, came over. Her father, a tall and stern-looking man, spoke first. "Julie, that is no way to speak to your guest, especially not to Larry's mother." His tone was firm, and it made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking just as upset, turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Mary, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit." They guided us away to a table at the edge of the setup. It was clear that this spot was an afterthought, with no proper setting. The ceremony started soon after, with speeches that felt empty given the tension. Then, unexpectedly, I was handed the microphone. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. "I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future," I began, my voice steady despite how I felt inside. "But I also believe in honesty and integrity, qualities that have been sadly missing in the events leading up to this day." Julie's face went from pink to red, her eyes glaring at me with anger. I was asked for money, time, and again in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with being cut off from my family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked a little, but I continued. Brian, seeing my distress, stepped closer and put a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him, then played the audio recording he had made. Julie's voice filled the air, cold and calculating, discussing how they would get more money from me. Larry's voice agreed, saying he was willing to leave me with nothing for the sake of his bride. The crowd murmured, shocked and disapproving. I turned off the recorder, and the silence was heavy. I gave my son an apartment and $35,000, and yet it was never enough. Today, I'm making it clear that I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am disowning Larry and Julie. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Julie screamed, her voice shrill and wild. "You've ruined my wedding. I curse you." After everything that had happened, coming back home was bittersweet. In the quiet, I made a decision that even surprised me. I quit my job. I had spent years healing others as a doctor, but now it was time to heal myself and rebuild the life that recent events had shaken. Brian, bless his heart, had just graduated from art college and was full of ideas and ambition. With the $37,000 I gave him, Brian opened his own tattoo parlor. It wasn't just any shop, it quickly became a place where art and skin came together in beautiful ways. Brian put his heart and soul into his work, and it paid off. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon his name was on everyone's lips in the local community. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hotspot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a sharp contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. "You're doing amazing, Ollie," I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. During these peaceful months, Larry reappeared one afternoon. He showed up at the door, his eyes tired, His shoulders slumped a far cry from the ambitious, sharp man he used to be. "Mom, I need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation to sit down. His voice was weary, so different from the demanding tone I had grown used to. I sighed and motioned for him to continue. "What is it, Larry?" "It's Lauren. She's driving me crazy, wanting more and more. Nothing's ever enough. I got a second job, but it's still not enough for her." His words were filled with desperation, but they couldn't erase the past so easily. "Larry, I warned you. I told you that living like that with someone like her was unsustainable." He rubbed his face, frustration clear. I know you did, but I thought," his voice trailed off, hopelessness replacing any explanation. "Thought what?" "That money would just appear because you wanted it to." My tone was harsh, years of pent-up frustration making it hard to soften my words. "Look at your brother. He started with the same amount and made something of himself without stepping on others." Larry bristled. "Yeah, well, not everyone's like Brian, are they? I have rights to the inheritance too, remember? And when you're gone, it'll come to me." That was the last straw. "Get out, Larry," I said, my voice cold and firm. "And don't come back. Not this time. You chose your path." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue, but then he turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. As I stood in the silence that followed, Brian came downstairs, having heard the last part of our exchange. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked. I nodded, wrapping my arms around him. "I am now, thanks to you. Let's just focus on the good we can do and the life we can build." He hugged me back, his presence a comforting reminder that not everything was lost in that moment. I knew that despite the heartaches, the journey was still worth it. We had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. After the storm with Larry had passed, our home settled into a calm I hadn't felt in years. It was during this peaceful time that Brian brought someone special home. Her name was Joyce, and she was everything Julie wasn't: kind, humble, and genuinely caring. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship grew stronger, and soon they announced their engagement. The wedding was nothing like Larry's extravagant affair. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony in our backyard. Flowers from the garden, homemade decorations, and a small group of close friends and family made the day perfect. During the reception, I pulled Brian aside and said, "You've chosen a wonderful woman," my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand and replied, "I learned from the best," giving me a knowing look. Life moved quickly after that. They sold the apartment I had given Brian, added some of their savings, and bought a small, cozy house just a few miles away. One sunny afternoon, while we were having tea in their new living room, Joyce shared some exciting news. "Mary, we're expecting twins," she announced, her eyes shining with joy. I nearly dropped my cup, overwhelmed with happiness. "Twins? Oh my goodness, that's wonderful." Brian beamed, his pride evident. "We wanted you to be the first to know. We're really happy, Mom." "Twins," I repeated, letting the words sink in. Grandchildren, it was a new chapter, one I was eager to begin. As for Larry, news from him was rare. The last I heard, he had divorced Julie. She had taken nearly everything in the split, leaving him to start over in another city. Despite the pain he had caused, it hurt to know he was out there somewhere, struggling because of his choices. One evening, as I sat looking through old photo albums, Brian came and sat beside me. He noticed a picture of Larry and me from years ago. "Do you ever hear from him?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No, after everything, he's chosen his path, and I have to respect that, even if it breaks my heart." Brian put an arm around me. "He's still my brother, Mom. Maybe one day he'll come around." Maybe, I agreed, though I wasn't really sure if he ever would. I believed it too, but for now, we have plenty to keep us busy, especially with those twins on the way. Brian chuckled, "Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town." We both laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth. Despite the past, despite the mistakes and heart actors, This moment with Brian felt like everything was exactly as it should be. Life was moving forward, and so were we, with new hopes and dreams just around the corner. I work at a big company, and I can earn enough for both of us, so don't worry, Eric said during our engagement. But as soon as we got married, he changed. He and Larry started insulting me every day. On top of that, Eric took control of all the money and cut down on living expenses. He'd constantly complain, even though I did all the cooking. Fed up, I told Eric I wanted a divorce and left the house. Later, I bumped into Larry by chance. "Hey, I heard you're getting a divorce now," he said. I was surprised and replied, "You must be mistaking me for someone else." Larry smirked and said, "Don't pretend. We're not together anymore, so don't come to me about money. I won't lend you a cent, remember that." Before I could respond, he disappeared into the crowd. I lowered my head, feeling the stares of people passing by, and started to laugh. Poor guy, he knows nothing. I can't wait to see his reaction when he finds out the truth. I'm Michelle, a 53-year-old housewife. I married Eric 7 years ago. When we met, Eric seemed like a great guy. We met at a gathering of friends, and I found him fun and friendly. As we said goodbye, he asked if we could meet just the two of us next time. Feeling a bit sad about parting, I agreed. When we started dating, he mentioned he had a son named Larry from his previous marriage. Larry was in 5th grade then, and we had dinner together a few times. He was a bright and pleasant boy, just like his dad. A year later, on the night Eric proposed, I decided to open up. You know I live with my parents and work part-time, right? The company I joined right after graduation was really tough and it ruined my health, I said. Is that so? It must have been hard to quit, Eric replied. I think long hours will be difficult for me in the future, I added. Eric smiled kindly and said, Don't worry about it. Just stay at home. I work at a big company, and I can earn enough for both of us. Relieved by his words, I accepted his proposal. I was happy to have met a good man and thought we were starting a happy married life. I never imagined I would feel so hopeless in less than half a year. As we got used to living as a family of 3, Eric and Larry's attitudes changed a lot. They started making fun of everything I did and said, "Mom, are you in bed again? Where's my sandwich?" Larry asked with a frown as he came into the bedroom before school. I had been helping with weeding at a nearby park yesterday and felt sick because it was an unusually hot day. I had already been feeling unwell since the day before. I had asked Eric for help, but he refused with an annoyed look and said, "Being a housewife must be nice. Just slacking off all year. I need my days off too, you know. Let me rest." The next morning, I couldn't get up because I had pushed myself too hard. I apologized to Larry and said, "Sorry, Larry. I couldn't make your sandwich. Here's some money to buy one at the grocery store." Larry complained, "Mom, can't you at least make a sandwich? You always take shortcuts with frozen food or leftovers. You're failing as a mom if you can't even cook." His words hurt. "Don't blame Mom, Larry," Eric said with a half smile as he passed by in the hallway. "Since you skipped the sandwich, tonight's dinner must be fancy." "Oh, is that so? Then I'll look forward to it. Being a housewife, you should have plenty of time for dinner, right? You're not sleeping all day, are you? Make sure to clean thoroughly without slacking." The two of them laughed at my poor condition and made their insensitive comments before leaving. As if I could prepare a fancy meal lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I let out a heavy sigh. Eric is extremely stingy despite being a section chief at a big company and earning a high salary. The money he gave me for living expenses was ridiculously low. It's my salary, so why should my wife manage it? Eric insisted on managing the finances himself after we got married, and I meekly agreed. I thought it didn't matter who handled the money as long as it was done properly. But then Eric started spending money as he pleased. It's necessary for work. Drinking expenses are business expenses. It's essential, he would say, as an excuse to buy expensive clothes and watches for himself. but he would make a sour face even if I needed something small. When I bought cheap snacks, Eric would get angry because he believed a housewife doesn't need any spending money. I had to ask for his permission every time I wanted to spend money, whether it was for a haircut or buying clothes. "One pair of jeans is enough, isn't it? You're buying more," he would ask. I replied, "I want a warm pair for winter." He said, "Fine, but get them from a cheap store." I'd also wanted to go to the hair salon regularly. "Can I go once every 3 months to keep my hairstyle?" I asked. Eric scoffed. "Why do you need to be fashionable? If you keep your hair long, you only need to cut it once every 7 months. No more haircuts." Because of this, I was only allowed to buy cheap makeup from drugstores. I wanted to use better products because the cheap ones were harsh on my skin, but Eric didn't care. The money Eric gave for living expenses was very low, about 1/3 of what most people spend. With this small budget, it was hard to maintain a balanced diet. When I complained, Eric responded smugly. On the TV show about saving money, they lived on this amount. They had a farmer relative who gave them vegetables and bread. I told him, "That's not possible with these high prices." He replied, "That's your job to manage." What really hurt me was how Eric acted when it came to sending a wreath for my dad's funeral. When Dad, who had been sick, passed away, and it was time to send a wreath, Eric frowned and said, "We don't need to send a wreath for the funeral, right? Only the main mourner needs to send one." He suggested, "Use your savings, it's not my problem." As I prepared for the funeral with tears in my eyes, his lack of care made me angry. I said, "I never planned to ask you for it, so don't worry." He replied, "Good, but do Larry and I really have to go? It'll ruin our long weekend. Right, Dad?" Larry added, "I wanted to play a new game." Although they complained, I didn't doubt they would come. However, Eric and Larry arrived late to the funeral, barely greeted my mom and relatives, and left quickly. My mom, who was very tired, didn't have the energy to get upset, but my relatives were furious. "What's going on, Eric? Your wife's father died, and you're acting so cold." "Larry, you've received so many gifts and allowances from Michelle's dad," they said. While I apologized to my relatives, I felt my love for Eric and Larry quickly fading. Eric, always in his stylish suits with a charming presence, and Larry, attending a prestigious university and seen as a handsome father and son by the neighbors, only insulted me at home. They wouldn't come straight home after work or school, instead wandering around and coming back with the smell of lipstick and perfume. Despite doing whatever they wanted, they treated me like a maid, demanding fancy meals with the little money I had for food. When I served dishes with chicken or pork, both Eric and Larry would glare at me with disdain and insult me. "Don't you want to serve your husband good food after he comes home from work? If I get sick from eating this bad food, how will you take responsibility? Are you even a mom?" they would say. I could make delicious meals, even with chicken or pork. They disliked vegetables and fish, but eating such a picky diet will make you sick. Eric would reply, "I'd eat if it were high quality. Don't complain when you can't satisfy us. I don't need advice from someone as weak as you." They used to eat while complaining, but lately they just left the food untouched. Yet, if I didn't cook, they would yell, "Are you slacking off even though you're a wife?" I would eat the leftovers for breakfast or lunch the next day, but tears would well up as I wondered for whom I was cooking. For their meals, they relied on store-bought sandwiches, instant noodles, and snacks. Eventually, Eric was diagnosed with prediabetes during a company health check, and Larry started gaining weight. It was inevitable. Then they lashed out at me, saying, "What kind of wife makes her husband and child sick? We don't need a useless person like you. We're getting a divorce." "Then I'll leave," I said. They were surprised when I agreed easily. "Are you sure? You're unemployed. You've been living off me. How will you survive now?" Eric asked, "Don't worry about me. I'll send the divorce papers for you to sign later. Please leave my stuff until the movers come to pick it up," I replied. "Nobody's going to take your stuff. Eric sneered. You'll definitely regret divorcing a high-earning, handsome guy like me. A kind husband who lets you be a housewife with 3 meals and naps. There's no one else like that in the world, right? That's right. You've been living in luxury on Dad's money till now. You'll struggle from here on, Larry added. As I packed my clothes into a suitcase, Eric and Larry kept talking behind me. Honestly, I envied Eric's ability to overestimate himself so much. When we were dating, I saw this part of him as confident and shining. You'll just go back to your parents, right? Say hi to your retired mom for me. You two will be heading straight to poverty, Eric said. Larry laughed at his father's prediction. They'll end up on welfare soon. They already reek of poverty, but with Grandma, it'll be the ultimate. The funeral the other day was nothing special. It smelled like poverty. I thought so too, like a poor family's funeral. I want a fancy one, Larry agreed. But for Dad, who works at a big company, and me, attending a prestigious university, poverty is a different world. Their endless comments made me really angry, but I knew it was pointless to argue, so I just let it go. After I went back home and explained everything to Mom, she said in a low voice, at the funeral, seeing Eric and Larry, I felt something was wrong. But I thought it's not good to interfere too much in my daughter's household, so I kept quiet. I was too busy taking care of Dad. I'm sorry for barging in like this. I replied, it's okay. I've been lonely without you. Why don't you stay here? Thanks, but once I get my job on track, I plan to move to an apartment, I said. Mom's concern was comforting, but I knew living with her might make me too dependent. Living nearby and visiting sometimes seemed like the right balance. Yes, Eric and Larry mocked me for being unemployed, but actually, I had been working from home. It all started with the budget recipes I posted on my blog. After getting many positive comments, I bravely launched a cooking site and shared my recipes, which quickly gained readers and internet fame. Soon after, an editor from a major publisher approached me, and now I'm getting ready to publish a cookbook. Because of this, I didn't have time to think much about the divorce, and the days flew by. One day, my phone rang insistently. I stopped stirring the ingredients in the pan and answered. Hello, I said. Hey, what's this about a clause for the divorce trial? Eric asked. I sighed, knowing it was about that. You and Larry insulted me all the time, I said. Oh, I thought, never mind, Eric said with relief in his voice. I didn't cheat or anything, you know. Did you record me and Larry? Your memory alone won't work. I replied, I've noted everything in my diary. Try to claim otherwise if you can. Eric scoffed, really, poor people and their obsession with money. You're so stingy. If you think you can get a deposit for the divorce trial, go ahead. After his outburst, Eric hung up. I finished cooking and then visited a detective agency to investigate Eric's background. Soon, his affair with a coworker was uncovered. The day after I sent photos of the two of them together and the investigation report to his company, Eric contacted me again. You spreading this at work is low. The angry manager reported it to the higher-ups, and now I'm in trouble, he said. I'm fired. Oh, she was the manager's daughter, wasn't she? It's your fault for cheating. Knowing they're strict about such things, I said, laughing. But you should be fine, right? With all the saving you did, you must have plenty of money. Aren't you and Larry living comfortably? Larry moved into a dorm this spring because commuting was tough. I prepaid dorm fees and have apartment loans. My savings were drained by that woman. She was two-timing me with a younger guy, Eric replied. Sounds tough for you, but it's none of my concern. Oh, and about the divorce trial deposit, I'll also take half the value of the apartment for property distribution. When the invoice arrives, please transfer the full amount to my account, I said. Eric was yelling on the other end, but I hung up without caring. One day, while returning from shopping in town, I bumped into Larry. He was dressed in his usual flashy clothes, with piercings all over his face and an eye-catching hairstyle. making him easy to spot from a distance. Seeing me, Larry raised his hand in greeting. "Hey, heard you're getting government assistance now." I looked puzzled. "Huh? Who are you mistaking me for?" "Don't pretend," Larry said, smirking. "It's obvious where an unemployed old lady like you would end up. If you had just followed me and Dad, you'd still be living a comfortable life. It's pathetic." Feeling really angry, I couldn't help but reply, "Getting government help is a citizen's right. Any one of us could need it someday due to illness or an accident. It's wrong to look down on that." Yeah, so you're saying you're getting it too," Larry said, smirking and pointing his finger at me. "Listen, you and I are estranged. Don't come crying to me for money. Remember that." As I opened my mouth to reply, he turned his back and disappeared into the crowd. I lowered my head, conscious of the stares of passers-by, shaking my shoulders. I couldn't help but laugh. It was just too ridiculous. Poor thing, he knows nothing. I can't wait to see his reaction when he finds out the truth. A few days later, I woke up to find an unbelievable number of missed calls from Larry. Reluctantly, I called back. Larry shouted furiously, "You deceived me, old woman. What are you talking about? I've heard from a cousin you got 3 high-rise apartments from Grandpa's inheritance and are living a carefree life. Hiding that and getting a divorce is cowardly," he said. "That's my personal asset. Why should I share it? I have to tell you or Eric, it's joint property. You should have done a distribution of property with Dad during the divorce. Unfortunately, it became mine after the divorce procedures, so I can't give it to Eric. Officially, I knew from Dad's will that it would be mine, but I delayed the process until after the divorce because I didn't want to share it with Eric." Larry shouted in frustration, "A rich woman like you getting government help? I'll report you to the authorities right now." "Feel free," I replied. "It's not me, but Eric, who is receiving it." Larry fell silent. "What I told you last time, it's not me," I explained as if talking to a child. "Honestly, even without the inheritance, I can live well. I have income from my cooking website and book sales, which I started secretly. But Eric, after spending all of his money on his affair, has lots of bills piling up and is borrowing heavily. When his affair was discovered and he was fired, his income stopped. Are you listening? Dad's on government assistance now," I said, pulling the phone away from my ear as Larry screamed. Waiting for him to calm down, I continued, "You really didn't know anything. He's too proud to tell his son. According to relatives, he asked for money. He's behind on his apartment rent and facing eviction, staying at home all day in an old apartment. If you're worried, why don't you contact him?" There was silence on the other end for a while. Then Larry said resentfully, "You're cold-hearted. After all Dad did for you, you have no intention of repaying him. If you have money, you should give some to Dad." "Why should I?" I said. "Since our marriage, it's been nothing but unpleasant memories. I don't feel like I owe him anything," I stated coldly. "If you're so concerned, why don't you, this son, lend him money? You're working part-time after all." "I don't have savings. The part-time pay goes to hanging out with friends and stuff," Larry said, suddenly evasive. I smirked. "You've been living quite lavishly for a student. Borrowing money to hang out at clubs is not a good idea." "How do you know that?" he asked. "The other day in town, I saw you from across the street. After we parted, you met up with a girl at a club and went into a brand store arm in arm. Also, a club membership card was left at the house. Using my credit card for shopping without my permission is out of the question." Larry stammered, "That's unfair. You got high-rise apartments from Grandpa. Why don't I or Dad get a share? This is discrimination." Yeah, the credit card bill will be sent soon. Make sure you pay it before it's due," I replied. Before I could finish, the call was disconnected. I sighed and ended the call too. Just when I thought it was all over, a few months later, Eric and Larry showed up at my parents' house without any notice. The doorbell rang nonstop, and when I answered, there they were. Expecting they came to ask for money, I let them in to avoid causing a scene in the neighborhood. Eric and Larry, who used to look so stylish, now appeared completely different, wearing wrinkled shirts and dirty pants, with lifeless and gaunt eyes. Yet they still had the energy to be sarcastic. As they walked into the living room, Eric looked around and sneered, "Same old house, huh? Why not sell one of those high-rise apartments and rebuild this place? Do something nice for Mom, living miserably on her pension. This is Dad's house, and we like it this way. More importantly, when are you two planning to pay me back?" "You're past the deadline," I said. Eric, lifting his chin arrogantly, replied, "Michelle, I'll forgive you now, so let's remarry. You started a cooking site, right? If you manage the household perfectly, I'll even let you work, so come back." Such a generous dad, forgiving the wife who abandoned her husband and child. So Mom, why not live with Dad again? Living with just two women must be insecure. Stunned, I was speechless. After a moment, intense anger welled up inside me. "Don't joke with me. How much more do you plan to ridicule and fool me?" I shouted at the astonished Eric and Larry. "After treating me like nothing more than a housekeeper, insulting me, not providing proper living expenses, and then kicking me out, now you want me back just because you found out I inherited high-rise apartments? No way. What? You're going to abandon us? Rich people really are stingy. Knowing we're struggling with money and still demanding payment, you're heartless. You were poor yourself until recently." "Don't get cocky," Eric retorted. In the middle of the argument, Mom returned from shopping. Eric and Larry immediately started buttering her up. "Please lend us some money. We'll probably pay it back. Besides, isn't it unfair that only Michelle gets Grandpa's inheritance? Give me one of the high-rise apartments too." "Hi, Grandma. Long time no see. How have you been?" "Grandma, please persuade Mom to remarry Dad. He doesn't want to break up, but Mom is being stubborn." Mom, surprised at first, changed her expression upon hearing their words. She placed her shopping bag on the floor and let out a deep sigh. "So shameless, both of you," she said. "What?" Eric and Larry responded, confused. "I'm telling you to have some shame," Mom shouted suddenly. Startled by her loud voice, Eric and Larry were understandably confused. Mom usually never scolded them sharply. "I've heard everything about the divorce from Michelle." "I can't believe you have the nerve to show up here," Mom said firmly. No, Michelle's exaggerating. You have to listen to our side too," Eric said quickly. "That's right, Grandma. Mom is quite the liar," Larry added. "I remember how well you two behaved at my husband's funeral." Mom cut off Larry's words sternly. "Arriving late, not greeting me or the relatives, yawning through the service, and leaving before the coffin was sent off. And now you dare ask for his inheritance? Go back to sleep." She drove a taken-aback Eric and Larry to the front door and glared at them one last time. "You two are now strangers to us. Don't come here again. If you do, I'll call the police." Mom threw their shoes out the door, forcing them to leave in their socks, and immediately locked the front door. Eric, who had been avoiding paying me, was advised by his lawyer that a lawsuit would cost even more. Reluctantly, he finally transferred the money to my account. Even though Eric was fired from his job, he couldn't find another one. His in-laws, hearing about his situation from relatives, stepped in to cover his debts. They visited my parents' house and apologized profusely for Eric's behavior. Later, Eric, having given up on finding a new job, returned to the countryside, pretending he was helping with the family's farming. However, the story of our divorce spread through the village, leading both children and elders to point and laugh at him. "There's thrifty Uncle Eric, even with a degree from a good university and a job at a big company. What's the use if your wife leaves you for being too arrogant?" they would say. The reason for his divorce from his first wife was also his reckless spending. "He'll never change." Being mocked by the villagers was embarrassing. Eric kept sending me persistent messages asking to remarry to save face, so I deleted his contact. His mistress, apparently no longer interested after the money ran out, had long since left him. I found her with the detective's help and made sure she paid the divorce trial's security deposit. I also made Larry pay back the money he used on the credit card without permission. Even though he was enrolled in a prestigious university and was on track to become successful like his father, Larry started skipping classes and fooling around. This led to failing grades and eventually getting expelled. His friends and girlfriends were worried, but Larry, in his arrogance, pushed them away with his prideful comments. He then had a big fight with Eric, saying, "You're my father, but you won't help pay off the debt." Now, they don't talk to each other. Larry lives alone in a small apartment, getting by with part-time jobs. Gone are the days of buying whatever he wanted and making sarcastic remarks despite his high earnings. For me, it's a refreshing change. My cooking website is doing well, and I signed a book deal. I moved to the top floor of the high-rise apartment I inherited from Dad. Mom is still healthy at 75, and the high-rise is close to our family home, so it's convenient if she needs anything. I'm planning a surprise hot spring trip for Mom's upcoming birthday. Though my marriage didn't work out, I want to keep having a good relationship with Mom.